Welcome to Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast, the podcast that is astounded how long it can take for a game to finish before players can still be booked. This week on Heart and Hand, I'm sure Chernobyl was cleared up in less time than this. Hello, welcome to Heart and Hand, the flagship show. We're so glad to be back. My name is Cammy Bell. I am stepping in for our regular host, Mr. Edgar, who's taking some well-earned rest. And I'm pleased to say I am joined by not just one, but two fabulous guests. We truly are hands across the water. So from one side of the UK, joining me on the East Coast is Mr. Ian Hogg. Hoggy, how are you?
I am very, very well and still chuckling at the aftermath.
Wonderful, wonderful. I dare say we could talk about that a little bit more, Ian. So let's do that in a wee bit. However, from across the water is Belfast's favourite son, and that is Mr. David Graham. David, thank you so much for joining us.
A pleasure to be here. Great to see you, Cammy. Great to see you, Hoggy. Obviously, we're still fighting with Boris to get this bridge between the east coast of Ulster and the west coast of Scotland. But in the meantime, this is as close as we can get, so long may it continue.
Excellent. Well, we are back after a bit of a hiatus. I don't even think you could call it really a winter break, as Rangers have obviously finished up the season. I'm probably sure you can remember the last league game that we played. However, after a warm weather training camp in Dubai, we were back in action in the Scottish Cup to play Stranraer on Friday evening. Boys, I'll come on to your takes in just a wee bit, because I think in the build-up to this game, certainly the expectations were high that we would be able to come out with a bit of a cricket score. We wanted to dust off some cobwebs, having obviously been out of action for a couple of weeks. The lineup, I think, Hoggy, was pretty straightforward in terms of we saw some necessary replacements and probably some voluntary ones as we started with Fodringman goals. Nathan Patterson making his first team debut at right back for the injured Tav. Katic, Edmondson and Halliday completed the back four. Scott Arfield, Ryan Jack and Stephen Davis in the midfield, with Joe Aribo, Jermaine Defoe and Jordan Jones making his comeback from injury. Hoggy, when you saw that team on Friday, my hope is that you were pretty comfortable with it when you saw it.
Oh yeah, definitely. You know, you got Fodringham, I think. Having him run out against Stranraer, no issues with that. Edmondson needs some game time. Halliday needs some game time. Nathan Patterson came into the side after looking pretty good against Locomotive Tashkent. And games against Stranraer, we really should be looking to blood any youngsters that we think are deserving. You know, the old, if you're good enough, you're young or you're old enough adage. And Patterson came in, and for me, he was one of the best Rangers players on the night. The midfield was fairly routine. The forward line fairly routine. That said, Jordan Jones came in, and I was really happy to see him coming in. And I'm glad I'm not sitting in the same room as David Graham with what I'm about to say. But Jordan Jones looked every inch the player that was back after a 12 to 14 week break. Just tried too hard. It ended up, certainly in the first half, Cammy running down avenues and getting a bit lost. So that's just hopefully first game syndrome, because Jordan Jones has shown what he can do prior to the injury. But yeah, you know, we really mixed it up. I was expecting a few goals. I was expecting a wee bit of urgency. Didn't really happen that way, though.
No, it did not. It did not. Before we come on to the goals, David, I'll get your take, because you must have had a vested interest in that left-hand side with Andy Halliday at left back. I suppose it's difficult. Even the most favoured Andy Halliday fan, such as yourself, has got to admit that it's difficult for him to be able to shoehorn Borna Barisic out the side, because he's probably one of our best players at the moment. But nice to see him be able to try and get the run out, and with Jones in front of him as well. Maybe not setting the header in fire, but still game time's important.
Okay, I mean, I think that I suppose from the point of view of the left hand side, Jones obviously, and Hoggy's entirely right. He certainly didn't have his best game, and I think that's trying to be as kind as I possibly can. He seemed to cut in a lot, and you're right. He was kind of almost wandering around the middle of the park at several occasions, which is trying to make something happen. You kind of get the sense, obviously, when you've Andy Halliday on the field, he will try to push forward as much as he can. But I mean, it's, you're comparing sort of apples and oranges when you're comparing the natural game of Borna Barisic compared to the natural game of Andy Halliday. But like, I do think, and I said this today in the daily update, I mean, I think that Jordan Jones is skating in very thin ice when it comes to really his Rangers' future. I know there's been certainly chat of, a Stoke bid and talking about $1 million and all the rest. He certainly didn't do anything against Stranraer that would have made us think, what, we really have to persevere with this kid. And it reminds me of someone who I couldn't stand, Josh Windass, who, if you recall the game, was it Fraserburgh 2 seasons ago? In the first round of the Scottish, or not the first round of the Scottish Cup, but the round we entered, he scored a couple of goals. I think he might have ended up with a hat-trick, and he certainly showed he was sort of a step above that standard, whilst that night Nico Katic had maybe shown it was time to retire. Sorry, I beg your pardon, Nico Crancher, that it was time to retire. And I think on overall Friday night, those are games that maybe a season or two we would have genuinely struggled with. We didn't ever struggle. We just didn't really get out of first gear. And I think the issue for the manager now is that there are players in our squad who, quite frankly, there are big question marks if we bring them to a starting 11 for important league games going forward.
Hoggy, coming back to Jones for just a second, because I think David does raise a good point with this, and I think that we have seen by now the most important thing, I believe, if you are a squad or a fringe player, the attitude has to be correct. That's one of the biggest things that Gerrard and his management team will assess you on. We've always thought Jones was pleased around the move to Rangers. Obviously, it's his boyhood club, etc. And I think the hope is that he's learned the hard way the lesson that if you try to go in and do an opponent and end up injuring yourself, you do nothing but cause setbacks for yourself. So would you like to see Jones stay and fight for a place and to try and see if he can compete for a position in the first 11? Likely not to necessarily outperform someone at the moment, but to remain in contention if, as I say, injuries, suspensions start to rack up or what have you, so that you can come in and be effective.
Oh yeah, I mean, you look just now, and the two wider players of the front three, and I'm not going to call them wingers because we don't play with wingers. The two kind of, the left and right hand side of Morelos or Defoe. Ryan, for the main games, Ryan Kent's one of them, and you've got one other berth, and Joe Aribo is really starting to make that his own. So you're talking about players to come in when there's injuries or suspensions, or players to come in to make a real impact off the bench. What I want is guys like, and I know that he's been criticised in some quarters, but Greg Docherty, and I'm sure we'll come on to him, but Greg Docherty clearly wants to stay and fight, and he's not giving up his dream lightly. I don't think anyone can criticise Greg Docherty for having that attitude. I'm not entirely sure Steven Gerrard was overly taken with Greg Docherty's attitude in the first place, I have to say, but I think he's knuckled down. He went to Shrewsbury, he's come back, he's probably going to go out on loan again, but he doesn't want to be sold. Jordan Jones, I'm expecting the same from Jordan Jones. He's joined his boyhood team, he wants it. No idea what his attitude's been like since day one. That's between, I guess, him and Steven Gerrard. Really, really expect him to knuckle down. And if he does knuckle down, he can be that guy that's behind Kent and Aribo, to be coming off the bench, to be making an impact. And to be honest, Cammy, he's got the pace and the skill to be doing that. If he's coming on after 60 minutes when defenders are knackered, that's an ideal time for him to be taking the game to the opponent. So I genuinely want him to stay, genuinely want him to succeed. But then I'm a Rangers supporter. I want all the Rangers players to succeed, because if they do, then we win the league.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to come on to the game itself, which I'm afraid I must do, It was a little bit of a kind of shaky start with the fact that Stranraer had came with a clear game plan of let's try and make sure that we can suffocate Rangers wherever possible. There was a little bit to me, David, that it felt like we were playing with a little bit of a strangeness from that first 11. There was probably a little bit of a lack of cohesion, which we've been used to being able to see. However, fortunately, the deadlock was broken by Scott Arfield just before half-time. And a goal from a corner kick, which actually wasn't a Rangers corner kick. So they say that the SFA will take action in 3 or 4 months' time. And the ball broke nicely for Arfield, who was just able to slot home from seeing a gap through a body of players. And we went into half-time, and I think maybe saved the players from a bit of a roasting from the manager, who afterwards actually said he was quite bored watching the game. But again, it settled the nerves, I think, a wee bit. And I think at that stage, going in at half-time with 1-0 up, it started to feel a little bit more routine rather than squiggly bum time.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think if we're trying to be kind, and this isn't a slight on the manager at all. I mean, I suppose 2 points. We are fortunate that game took place on Friday night, and I mean, strange comment that it sounds. We obviously had Cowdenbeath last year, which was postponed, which meant we then went to Kilmarnock, and Joe Worrell and the rest is history to an extent. But we have kind of got that first sort of game out of the way after the winter break, which in theory, and will not count our chickens, should mean that we're coming in fresher for what is a very important game on Wednesday night. But I suppose in fairness to that particular starting 11, probably a lot of them hadn't played a great deal of football together. Some of them hadn't played a great deal of football for some time. Particularly the like of sort of that left-hand side of Halliday and Jones. And obviously, well, Fotheringham is a goalkeeper, but you're still bringing guys in who haven't played a lot. Edmondson's another one who has featured sort of sporadically. So I suppose the difficulty is you're then coming in a situation where you have 40,000 and a really great attendance from the Bears for a cold Friday night. You have 40,000 staring at you saying basically put a cricket score on, and you've got an opposition who have just simply parked the bus, and they weren't even pressing us to try to sort of disrupt our play. So there's a lot of the time where we were playing keep ball, but we simply weren't going anywhere with it. And maybe because we lacked that bit of sort of incision and that kind of game-changing player, whether it's a Kent or a Morelos or even an Aribo, it kind of meant then it was a case of, if you ever recall the Simpsons episode where they put the soccer match on the TV, they pass the ball between each other a few times, then there's a riot. That was almost what it reminded me of, where it was just sort of pass, nothing overly happened, and then we kind of went back and did it again. So it wasn't perfect. I said in the daily update earlier, and I'll reiterate this, we're through to the next round. We've got a favourable draw in the next round. Let's sort of consign that game to history, where a little bit like, if you recall, Livingston earlier in the season, utter dross to go through, but it got us to the final, or it was part of getting us to the final. Ultimately, that's the main thing, isn't it?
Hoggy, the game then went into the hour mark, and your favourite player came on to replace Jordan Jones, which was Brandon Barker, and without coincidence, a couple of minutes later, Jermaine Defoe does a lovely turn in the box. The Stranraer centre half can't do much to be able to pick him up. It's a clear clip of the heels, and Defoe goes down. Rightly says the selfish strikers chant of "I won it, therefore I'm taking it," which he duly does. Puts the ball away fantastically, as it just goes by the Stranraer keeper's right-hand post. It's a sublime finish for a penalty, which is Defoe's bread and butter. He then heads off as Shea Ojo then replaced him, and then with about 10 on the clock to go, Kai Kennedy makes his debut for Rangers, replacing Joe Aribo. We won't dwell too much on this because it is routine. We're not talking about the amount of goals that we were needing to get. But David certainly does make a good point, where it's about probably settling some nerves and just getting kind of back into business a wee bit after the break for the last 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, do you know, I'm going to credit Stranraer. Despite their league position, they Stevie Fannell, I think, is their manager. They've obviously been drilled for the past week to play 3-5-2 or really 5-3-2 or really actually 5-4-1. 1. Because poor Ryan Stevenson up front was miles away from anyone else. But they were drilled superbly, and the 3 centre halves played very, very well. It was almost like an attack against defence training match as we were sat there in -4 conditions. That was fun. But yeah, Brandon Barker comes on, probably for the first time ever. I'll say, and Brandon Barker changed the game. I'm not his biggest fan. Brandon, if you're listening, prove me wrong, please. We get the penalty. We win 2-0. Stranraer get a bit of cash. I like Stranraer's tweet after the game when the Rangers outlined the attendance, 38,560, and Stranraer had a gif of a man basically doing snow angels and money. For Stranraer, that's what it was all about. They've walked away with something like 200 grand. That'll keep them going for 2 or 3 years now. David's right. We move on. The game was pish, but really, it was attack against defence, and it was a kind of de facto training game.
Can I just get your opinions then? Because one of the things that was kind of getting discussed was obviously with this game and then St Mirren at home on Wednesday. Was about Patterson being able to come in, and there was the conversation regarding whether or not Patterson would fit in there and make his debut, or whether or not we would go back to the trusted hands of John Flanagan. And I was in the camp of, well, potentially we could play Patterson for Stranraer, take the opposition level as it would appear, and then look potentially at replacing Patterson for the St Mirren game with John Flanagan. Right now, what's your gut feelings? Would you keep Patterson there? Would you let him retain his berth?
Yeah, I would. I think Patterson was the one of the two fullbacks who was driving forward all the time, getting crosses into the box, and the kid can clearly defend as well. I'm not shy of a tackle as he got a booking. Against St Mirren, I'd have him in there. Barisic will be back in the team. I think that's just a more natural replacement to James Tavernier. Let's face it, going forward against St Mirren, we will have most of the ball. We'll look to create. I'd keep him in there and then review it after the game for Hearts at the weekend.
David, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think probably Nathan Patterson's fortunate that this fixture is St Mirren at home. I think if it was an away fixture, I think if it was, with respect to St Mirren, and we're not taking it lightly, if it was a Hearts or a Hibs or an Aberdeen or someone who was the higher end of the table, it probably would be a wider conversation. But ultimately, there's always a possibility of, and we don't want to go down a rabbit hole with this, but of Tav going at some point. Like John Flanagan, the manager has already said, is playing for his future. He is not, the long-term right-back for Glasgow Rangers. I'm not necessarily saying Nathan Patterson is, but what I am saying is certainly if we can't afford to put a young lad in against St Mirren, having, as Hoggy rightly says, proven himself in a couple of sort of lower-level fixtures, when can we do that? And that does create the situation where, I'm not a cliche, you're good enough, you're old enough, but it does mean that if you can't put him against St Mirren, who can you put him in against? So therefore, if you can't put him in against the bottom end table in the league, why essentially do we have him around and about us? Because, in all reality, yes, we tried it with Miles Spearman against, Celtic, and he got totally destroyed, but he probably was never good enough, and we probably knew that already. Nathan Patterson, in my view, is much more of a step up, albeit a right-sided player more than left. So look, let's give it a go. If we're reading our words and he's had an absolute nightmare, well, so be it. But I think Hoggy's right. Let's go with him, see how it works out.
Excellent. Well, as I say, the game wasn't the manager's favourite to watch. However, we got there, and that was the most important thing. Qualification was all that mattered. And in their usual sense of professionalism and trying to emulate the Champions League draw, Sports Scene eventually, before we all had to return to work today, did the fifth round draw where Rangers were drawn away to Hamilton Accies for the weekend of the 8th and 9th of February. Hoggy, before I come on to Accies themselves as the actual draw, the club and their manager Brian Rice today released a statement where he has voluntarily admitted to breaches of the Football Association's rules regarding gambling. He has also within that statement admitted that he has had previous issues in this area and was in recovery, however has relapsed sadly. Hamilton Accies were able to also release a statement on top of that stating that he has their full support. And again, as I say, he has voluntarily given this information to the Football Association for whatever sanctions or outcomes may come from this. And I don't think I'm alone in explaining and passing on the sincere support of everyone at Heart and Hand for Mr. Rice's addiction issues. It's a horrible, horrible state of affairs to be in.
It certainly is. I mean, addiction's an illness. Brian Rice is a gambling addict. He's admitted that. He was in recovery. And he's lapsed. He's fallen over. And he's recognised it and he's voluntarily outlined, I'm betting. He didn't have to. So that shows bravery. It shows honesty. It shows real courage. Hats off to the guy. To come out in an area like football where he'll probably get some chance against him now and all the rest of it. It does. It's big balls stuff, Cammy, and I think what Brian Rice and Colin McGowan on behalf of the board that Hamilton Accies have done today is really, really classy, and I've got nothing but best wishes for him.
In other news as well, what's happened recently with regards some of the players who missed the game against Stranraer. We had a closed-door game at the Hummel Training Centre on Saturday afternoon, and more of the regular first-teamers, David, made appearances in that. This was a 4-1 win over Queen of the South, and some of the players involved, there was obviously a bit of a rotation, but included Alan McGregor, Connor Goldson, Borna Barisic, Glenn Kamara, Alfredo Morelos, Ryan Kent. Shea Ojo played in both games. He played on the Friday and the Saturday. Scored a goal against Queen of the South with Alfie getting a double and Ryan Kent getting one as well. The Queen of the South manager, Stephen Dobby, who also scored the consolation goal, came out and was very, very complimentary about not only Morelos and his current performances, but also was very impressed with Rangers' front three and how industrious we were, and was very pleased that they were able to keep the score, I think, at 4-1. So, David, interesting to note, because I think Ian mentioned it before, and I think you kind of touched on it too, that there is a little bit of a cloud hanging around the fact that we want to get back to league business as soon as we can because of what happened last year and the slip-ups after the winter break. But seemed to be a fairly straightforward training game, for want of a better term, and a good run out for some of the boys after coming back from Dubai and coming back from a bit of a break.
Again, and I think it's very important as well, coming from the point of view that there was a bit of criticism. I think actually Chris had mentioned it in the pod. I think maybe why the guys were out in Dubai, where they had came back from Spain last year, and there was a sort of general sense of their legs were a bit heavy. But obviously the positive side of that was that although there's a bit of short-term pain, you could clearly see we finished the league in the best shape. We finished, and not just finished games well, but we finished the season well because of probably that hard work that had been put in. The proof of the pudding's in the eating. You can score 40 goals against Queen of the South in a closed-door game. It's what happens on Wednesday night, and then it's what happens on Sunday that's obviously important. But you're entirely right to say that if the guys like Kent and Morelos are getting on the score sheet, that's very positive, and that's a good habit for them to get into. I know you're maybe going to mention sort of transfers and things down the line, but it certainly does spark that idea of the squad is probably quite quickly kind of getting split into guaranteed starters if fit, or certainly pushing to get a start if fit, and others who are sort of maybe making up the numbers, which sounds a wee bit harsh, but certainly there's a bit of a gulf in class. But that's what's going to happen when the transfer windows that we've gone through and the amount of times we've had to wipe the slate clean in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hoggy, as David mentions, in terms of where we're at from a transfer perspective, obviously we're still coming out probably the middle part of the transfer window for the month. Rangers have confirmed today that Jamie Murphy has moved to Burton Albion. which was a move I think that was pretty much expected. Jamie Burr-Jonas has went out on loan to Partick Thistle to the end of the season. Andy Firth has signed a new a 1-year extension on his contract as well. And at the moment, Greg Docherty, there was rumours going across the weekend that there was a potential move to Sunderland. However, that now appears to have collapsed. So it's interesting that we are certainly doing business, and I think that the manager alluded to several instances across a number of interviews that the expectation was he did think players would be going out the door. And I certainly think that David's kind of hit the nail on the head, that there's probably a periphery of players who it's expected that we would have had move, and certainly Murphy and Burr-Jonas were in that rank at the moment. Zach Rudden obviously just confirmed his move at the end of last week. So we are starting to do a little bit of a kind of trim, but fortunately we're not in a space where we have been in previous seasons where we're talking about a whole-scale shake-up.
Well, I think that's the key, Cammy, that over the past few years, Christ, it's felt like the past 8 years. By the time you hit the winter, we are fishing about the bin, basically, trying to find frees here and there or loans here and there to spice up the squad or to try and improve the squad. And it's felt as if we get to winter and we go back to basics. So it feels encouraging that we're not. It feels somewhat odd that we're not. And I know plenty of people have been on social media talking about, we're not doing enough. For me, I genuinely think that's just a bit of a knee-jerk towards we're so used to doing lots of business and now we don't have to, that it feels strange. The guys that have gone out, Serge Atakai, Eros Grezda, Zach Rudden, and we released on his contract expired, Shel Baldy from the youth team. None of those guys were getting anywhere near the starting lineup or even the first team squad. Of the guys that have gone out on loan, Jamie Burr-Jonas just needs it, and he'll go to Thistle. I think he'll do quite well. And Jamie Murphy needs to play. Greg Docherty needs to play. So trimming the squad of guys who are getting nowhere near the first team picture is the right thing to do. Introducing guys like Kai Kennedy and Nathan Patterson and Lewis Mayo and whomever else, again, the right thing to do. For me, the key now is, now that we've lost guys like Andy King, for example, who went back to Leicester just before the new year, and Burr-Jonas has gone out, does that leave us a little light in central midfield? Possibly. Are we a little light in wider forward players? Possibly. All depends if we trust Shiojo enough, if we trust Brandon Barker enough, or if we want to just kind of spice that up a little bit. I guess ultimately for me, Cammy, it's going to be about if we trim the squad and trim the wage bill to the right amount, then I know the manager said he's not expecting anyone. I still do. I still expect one to come in, and probably a kind of English Premiership player that ain't going to get a game, like an Andy King, for example. Only not him, given he's away to whatever he's away to. So it's good news that the squad is getting trimmed because it's freeing up cash when these guys just ain't going to play.
Yeah, I think so, and I think David. Just to come back to a point that Hoggy touched on there as well, because I will ask you from a transfer perspective, if you've got any particular parts of the team that you'd like to see us strengthen with some quality. The good thing about being able to see guys like Patterson and Kenny being able to try and come is that we have a lot of positive stories. We obviously just touched on Mayo there and Boody. We've got young Coombs, who's obviously making a lot of headlines from the development squads as well, being able to come into teams. So this is really encouraging to be able to see us include these guys and get them in and around the first team. But they're also playing with quality players who will do nothing but, obviously give them that coaching, give them that kind of emphasis about continually striving to improve, etc., etc. But from a perspective of purely keeping everyone that we have at the moment, we don't have any outgoings just now of major quality. Where would you like to see us being able to try and strengthen? Is there any particular areas of the team that you think could do with a little bit of support?
I think probably the PTSD from the semi-final of the League Cup last year against Aberdeen, where we put in Umar Sadiq, which let's not even go down that particular conversation. But I do have a bit of a concern where obviously Alfie's out, he's suspended at the moment. Obviously, he's probably due about another 6 yellow cards from the Celtic game by the time all's said and done. But I suppose on a serious point, he is likely to be suspended again before the end of the season. I think that I would be concerned if Jermaine Defoe was to pull up with a hamstring injury. The guy is 37 now, so it's not as if he is not statistically more likely to become injured, just given his age profile. I wouldn't particularly want to go into a game with Greg Stewart as kind of our out-and-out striker. Obviously, Ryan Kent could do a job there. There's even a school of thought to say that you would almost play with 3 attackers and no sort of spearhead at the front. If I was kind of wanting to bring someone in, it would be a striker or certainly an attacker of some form. I suppose the difficulty I have when it comes to the wider point, the guys we've mentioned there that are going out, the Murphys and the Dohertys and the like, they're either going out because they want to go out to prove themselves for the future, or they're going out to save us money. My concern is that Andy King is case in point. We brought in Andy King on the assumption that he would be a crucial part of, having been there and done that with Leicester, a crucial part on and off the field of closing down games and just controlling the football when we needed it to be controlled. He never really broke any delf, and that is what concerns me. You could name a player, particularly any sort of bottom 10 side in the Premiership, who's maybe not making the squad or maybe not making the first team 11, and bring them up to Glasgow. Well, that's great, but how do they get into the side? Who do they come in over? And it leads me to the conversation with Nathan Patterson earlier. Why can we not rely on someone coming from the youth team if required to sit on the bench? Because realistically, at some stage, they're going to have to come in to prove themselves. Simply why can that not be now? I'm open. I know that Alex Staff has said that it's simply maybe because our academy just isn't at that level yet. But I mean, at the moment, I would like to bring someone in. Yes, I think Hoggy's right to say I think someone will come in, but it does create a situation of we either need to bring someone in because they are better than who we've got already. That will cost us money and a wage hike, or else bringing someone in who is of a similar level or if not below, and that essentially, we're saying you're coming in to warm the bench and that's really need you in the next 4 months. But I hope that makes sense, because I've been trying to run that over my head as to how I would best explain that,
Well, yeah, I think it's kind of what we were talking about beforehand. We've had players who have had to leave the club, like Jamie Murphy, in order to get game time. But Hoggy, we want to bring in quality. We mentioned, obviously, would we have the funds available to bring in a player currently in the Premiership not getting games? But if we were to, as David's alluding to, strengthen as a strike force, the difficulty is that you've got Alfie. He's not coming out of that slot, shy of suspensions. Jermaine Defoe is in great shape, but again, as David says, he could be prone to injury. The selling point's going to be pretty difficult if you're saying to that Premiership player, come and play with us and get games, but those games and the opportunities may be limited to appearances off the bench.
At the end of the day, anyone coming in to be a third striker knows that they're the striking equivalent of Andy Firth, who incidentally has signed his 1 year extension. Andy, well done. You have the fucking best job in the world, mate.
Living the dream.
Oh, hell, living the dream. Doesn't have to play. Picks up a wage and gets to celebrate in the park on the pitch at Parkhead after we've stuffed him. Brilliant. But anyone coming up to fulfil that role, I don't think they're going to be better than Morelos or Defoe. I'd be massively surprised. So they know that they're coming up to do that. So, but whatever way you look at it, Cammy, it's one of 3 situations. Either we find someone that can fulfil that role and wants to fulfil that role, or we don't, and it's Greg Stewart, or we then go beyond that and it's into the development squad. And ultimately, the winter transfer window is a bit like that. It is a bit bargain binish, if you like, or guys that simply want to play or want the opportunity to play. We're just going to have to kind of ride it out. I do not expect any movement until the end of the month, though.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and we'll have to see what happens. Plus, it could be interesting now that it's down south with Marcus Rashford and Harry Kane, both with fairly long-term injuries. Could it be the case that just adds another zero onto Alfredo Morelos' value, which I think currently is sitting at about £200 million? We won't accept a bid less than that.
Exactly. Tell them all to fuck off. You're not getting them.
Now, speaking of our beloved Alfredo, and I'm going to get a bit ranty here, so I'll apologise for any swearing that may come up at this point, listeners. But on Friday, somewhat ironically, some would say coincidentally, I wouldn't be one of them, that Rangers were given a notice that the SFA were placing another charge against Alfredo Morelos for a third yellow card delivered due to his gesture after coming off. This was after the game, as Kevin Clancy apparently deemed that as unsporting behaviour. Very, very odd that the game being played on the 29th of December and the SFA notifying us on the 17th of January, on the same day, I may add, that we were about to start back into Scottish Cup business in our first game back after the break. Now, just to be clear with this, Alfie won't miss any further games as a result of that. He's going to miss against Hearts and St Mirren. He obviously missed out against Stranraer, but that was because of double booking in the competition last season. That was just a carryover. However, he will miss Hearts and he will miss St Mirren. Ian, it's difficult to probably put into words without, as I say, becoming ultra sweary. This is beyond farcical now in terms of what's happening. I don't want to even necessarily talk about Alfredo Morelos because I think that we've spoken about him a lot. And we are of agreement that he does get refereed to different standards, that he is held to a different standard, and we can all come up with examples where similar things have happened elsewhere and nothing has happened. But yet when Alfredo does it, it is deemed cautionable. Now, I would like to get your take on this. You're a far smarter man than myself. Why is it that the SFA are now delivering post-game punishments so late on, and on the same day that the club that they're delivering the sanction against have started to restart their campaign, although in this particular incident it wasn't in the league, it was in the Scottish Cup. Why is it such a shambles? What is it that's happening with the compliance officer that this seems to be so muddy in terms of any clear distinction about what a process is, how the compliance officer is used? We were all told, let's not re-referee games, but yet that seems to be happening now. Hoggy, I don't understand it, and I don't understand why this is happening to certain players from certain clubs, and yet other clubs are quite comfortably getting away with it.
With Alfredo Morelos specifically, this stinks. So, you'll remember last year when Rangers beat Celtic at Ibrox and comprehensively beat Celtic at Ibrox, and there was no real major talking points until someone from Celtic obviously got on the phone 2 days later to Chris Sutton and it all kicked off. Alfredo Morelos at that point was the Antichrist. Well, the same happened this time. Rangers comprehensively beat Celtic. Alfie gets sent off for a daft second booking, and yeah, it was deserved, right? He walks off the park. He makes a gesture to the Rangers bench to show time's up. The same gesture, incidentally, that Victor Wanyama made a few seasons ago in a Scottish Cup semi-final, and Chris Sutton didn't piss his pants at that. And it's almost felt as if we had 19 days since the game, and the SFA clarifying, love that word, clarifying, that Alfredo Morelos was booked for a third time in the match, which incidentally can happen. It's just it's a points totting up thing. So But 19 days later, Rangers are informed that he's been booked. Rangers didn't know. Stephen Gerrard was on record saying, well, if the compliance officer takes any action, then we'll need to deal with it if and when that happens. Rangers clearly didn't know that he'd been booked for a third time. So in other words, it's made up shite by the SFA, because we've had 19 days of meltdown. I'd be making one to that, Cameron. We've had 19 days of meltdown, and it absolutely stinks of the SFA thinking, fuck, we cannot charge Alfredo Morelos under the rules. And the Tims are going completely tonto. I know. Let's inform them of a fake yellow card that no one knew about and trumped up crap, despite basically ignoring every one of Celtic's antics at Ibrox since 2017. It's laughingstock stuff from the Scottish FA. They talk about transparency, talk about clarification, talk about all that kind of crap. This lot couldn't manage a fucking fish supper.
David, through my various kind of walks of life, I've become acquainted with Celtic fans. I know some of them. I would even go so far as to say I quite like a few of them. And the reason as to why I quite like them is because, unlike the vast majority, they're quite sensible. They're quite, down to earth. They understand exactly what's going on. Now, speaking to them about some of this, very simply and almost unilaterally to a man, they just want to move on. And what I'm very confused about with all of this is that it seems to be the case that nothing tremendously bad happened within that game. We can understand that the usual Celtic choir cheerleaders, Chris Sutton, as Ian's mentioned there, will make ridiculous comments about gestures and various other bits and bobs, and these things are all just absolute, it's just a circus. But what I don't understand is, why are the SFA almost to a certain extent deliberately provoking this and trying to keep it running? Because now we're getting into a case of it's almost statement wars. So whether Celtic come out and make a statement, or the SFA, or Rangers, or a media pundit comes out to say something in response to this, it feels like as if as soon as the waters start to settle, now the SFA just purposely want to dip another stone in it. Why are they purposefully going down this road with Rangers that it just feels like as if they just want us to carry on? And you've got morons like John Hartson being able to try and fan the flames of this by incredibly coming out with a moral high ground. A moral high ground, I might add, from a man who kicked a teammate in the head when he was on the ground. What's the purpose of this, David? What do you see as being the SFA's motive behind this?
I think, Cammy, that there isn't a motive. And I think that the problem is that surely in an organisation the size of the SFA, they've got someone there who is a media advisor, consultant, PR guy, or there's bound to be a man or woman in there who is paid to give advice as to how you deal with information that either comes out of your organisation or goes in. What I don't understand is, and if you read even a cursory glance at some of Alistair Campbell's work, or whoever is you'd see as sort of a media mogul guru, the key thing is, if you've got a story, whatever the scandal is, whether it's sex, drugs, or rock and roll, and it's in line with whatever organisation, get all the information out. Don't be caught. It's like the classic of the Profumo affair. He lied about his affair. He went on the record in Parliament and lied about it, even though everyone, I think, including his wife and him, knew that what he had been up to. So the point is here, deal with all the information and all the snowballs that can be fired as early and as quickly as possible after a powder keg game, which, in all honesty, when we compared to some old firms, it was fairly low key in the grand scale of things. So deal with it almost the way in Northern Ireland we deal with, contentious parading. Try to get it to pass off peacefully, then put the issue to bed, don't make a news story out of it, and let's all get on with our lives. It's now the 20th of January. So it's almost a month, and I joked in the Daily Update that we will still be dealing with the fallout from this Old Firm game, basically just as the lead up to the next one comes along. And that's not necessarily their fault or our fault. It's the SFA's fault, because of course football clubs are going to stand up for their players. Of course they're going to try to play to their galleries, but the SFA have to deal with it. They need to man up, and they need to say, right, line in the sand. We're all going to move on because let's deal with the reality. Look at the fallout. I know we're going to talk about them going, even more nuts than they normally do after a defeat. Let's consider what will happen when 55 comes. Now, the SFA will deal with an absolute, snowball of hassle for months, for the whole off season, and it'll be no one's fault but their own. So, see, from our point of view, see if I was advising the club, I would say to lump it at them and to continue that fight and to continue putting our point of view across, because for too long we've stuck up with the old stiff upper lip. You know what, lads, we're better than that. Let's get on with it. No. Let's fight fire with fire, because the SFA has allowed the vacuum to be filled. That's not our fault. Let's fight the corner Glasgow Rangers, because ultimately, see if we don't, that vacuum's filled with green and white only.
Hoggy, do we lead the charge on this as a club? And I don't mean from a PR perspective. I just mean at this point, we need some sort of transparency from the SFA to understand the process and what happens here, or is it just a case of waiting until it happens to Celtic and then they'll start to force a change?
No, we need to force it. We started with post Old Firm game that we won, so it's the right time to do it. We called on VAR, the introduction of VAR, and for better officiating in Scotland, it's the right time to do it. So from here on in, I think we should just fucking take the fight to them, because otherwise it's not going to happen. It will only happen if something to the detriment of Celtic, no laughing at the back now, happens. And we're the biggest club in Scotland, so we really should be taking the fight to them, Cammy.
I've got to agree with that. And I think probably just to round that off as well, boys, is what I really enjoy about all of these things, and David's hit the nail on the head, that match at Parkhead had very, very little in terms of contentious points to be able to try and come out the back of it. Yet we hear about, as I say, from pundits about, fingers meaning horrible gestures, players getting booked and then it not being reported until months later. And fundamentally, it's been driven as well by Celtic cheerleaders in the media. However, that all being said, it doesn't mean that we can't continue to have a bit of a laugh at our chums from across the road. Ian, we're nearly a month into this, but still, yes, it's still pretty humorous in certain circles, I think you would find.
It is. We're what, 20 days on or something like that, or 20, in fact 22 days on now. And we've had John Hartson calling Rangers morally dreadful because we want to protect our club. This is from John, who kicked his own teammate in the head and told his wife on her birthday that he'd been shagging someone else for a year and that he was leaving her. So the day we take morality lessons from that arsehole is the day that freezes over. Past 20 odd days, we've had Lonely Hearts Club Bill Leckie being xenophobic Bill Leckie. We've had Alan Brazil. We've had Chris Sutton and Hollycomb Overdrive. We've had Michael Stewart the same. And all the while, the paper that they're in asking for a Respect Our Players campaign. I thought that was ironic. But, what's really interesting in some of that meltdown reaction, and a meltdown that was called a meltdown, incidentally, by Callum McGregor. We've had 1 win at Parkhead in 9 years, with one of the most one-sided refereeing performances, Cammy, that you'll see. Penalty for Celtic, a handball goal given to Celtic, a penalty for the same offence not given to Rangers, a red card for Rangers whilst Julien, Ryan Christie and Bolingoli don't walk, but it's the ref's fault. Remember, Cammy, remember the Celtic fans when they hung out the flag of war until they get fucked in their own backyard and their cheerleaders had to run to the press and wail with some xenophobia, it's no fair. Timmy Tears continued. 2 days after the game, one of my all-time favourites as the Celtic rumour mill went into absolute overdrive. Alfredo Morelos was looking at jail time. That Celtic-driven rumour mill had Alfie booting Ryan Christie so hard in the bollocks after the game that he burst a testicle. Hence, emergency surgery was required, and Alfie was getting done for GBH which is why, of course, the Masonic cops let Mr. Morelos go immediately to the airport. Christie, recovering from emergency surgery, stopped laughing at the back, grew arms and legs. And I must admit, you got to credit them for imagination. Had it been real and had Alfie actually kicked Ryan Christie like that, poor Christie would have had his fanny amputated by now and his tampon removed from his nasal cavity. Day 9, Cammy, was another favourite. I didn't listen to Radio Clyde. I don't tend to listen to Radio Clyde, but this one was all over Twitter as a rather hysterical Celtic fan was challenging Hugh Keevins and asking why head of referees Jim Fleming wasn't coming out to talk about the goings on at Parkhead. Hugh Keevins had to inform him that Jim Fleming died a few months ago. And even in the past week, all the wailing and gnashing about Ryan Christie rightly getting a ban, Alfredo and Ryan Kent not. Today, Monday the 20th of January, we have had the crowning creme de la shit. Step forward, the renowned Joe O'Rourke, the General Secretary of the Celtic Supporters Association, a spokesman, if you like. Joe's well known, David Graham, I don't know if you know this, but he's well known for allowing his bigoted mass to slip. He suggested a few years ago that while the prods were building the Titanic, all the Catholics were building an iceberg. The only problem was the ones that built the ship didn't sail on it. So, day 22, Joe released...
That doesn't make any sense. Just for the record, but...
Well, if you think that doesn't make any sense, wait to hear what he said today. So he released an article on the CSA website, and that's the Celtic Supporters Association, not the other CSA that are probably chasing Joe, entitled "Serial Cheats at the SFA. What can we do about it?" And I'll pull out some points. It would appear that no matter what complaints and questions come to the SFA from the supporters of Celtic with the way they operate, the SFA continue to rub our noses in it and treat us with utter contempt. Well, if the shoe fits. The shambles surrounding the charges against Sevco, got to love a Sevco, boys, and the refusal to take action against serial thugs, Morelos and Kent, serial thugs, should embarrass the whole sorry lot of them. As if things can't get any worse, the SFA announced that the new head of refereeing, could it be any worse? I give you another son of Dallas, Crawford Allen, who incidentally isn't a son of Hugh Dallas. Could they not find someone with a proper Christian name? ? I wasn't expecting. I wasn't. And by the way, I'm not making this up. He then says. He says, I wasn't expecting Seamus O'Shamrock, but another one of the brethren. We may as well have Mason Boyne. He really is complaining that the head of referee's name isn't Irish sounding enough. Then he says, I really don't know how much more the Celtic support will take before they vote with their feet. The order of the day, stop Celtic by any means. But we must find a way of getting a fair deal. It's apparent the rest of Scottish football supporters aren't interested in backing us. We'll have to do it ourselves. Everything we've been through in the past few years, we've handed Celtic 7 titles in a plate, guys. We've had offside goals to win cup finals. Kevin Clancy failing to send off 3 Celtic players at Parkhead, whilst we have 1 sent off. A handball goal, a soft penalty, a failure to give us 1 for the same offence. Boys, see if there's a conspiracy against Celtic. Those executing the conspiracy are fucking hopeless. The trouble is, dear old Joe thought we'd die. We didn't. We wouldn't allow it. 22 days have passed since our first victory at Parkhead. In 9 years, 2 months and 5 days. Can you imagine how that crackpot will react if and when we actually won a league title? Joe, and Cammy, I'm going to address Joe because I know he's going to be listening. Never mind what I've just said. I think you're right. It's the Masons pulling the strings against your boys. You're the only one that can see the light. You're the only one that has the intelligence. Joe, continue to lead. Others will follow. and we will bow down to the strength of your crayon. Cammy.
Well, thank you, Ian, and look, thanks to Joe for continuing on for the. It's not conspiracy theories. This is cold hard truth, and he's right, and that's what's obviously caused it. And a referee conspiracy against you when your player is booked 3 weeks after a game has finished certainly shows me that obviously there is definitely a subplot here to ensure that Rangers win the league. That's all from us here at Heart and Hand Towers for this week. We will have our extra show, which will follow from the St Mirren game. And all that's left for me to do is to thank our executive producers, Mr. Mike Lee and Mr. Paul Miles. And most importantly, to thank my two guests who have been excellent today. And thank you so much for your time. Firstly, Mr. David Graham.
No surrender is our cry.
And Mr. Ian Hogg.
How can I follow that? Thank you very much, Cameron.
That's all, folks. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll speak to you soon. Okay, bye.
If you enjoyed today's show, why not check out our Patreon site? For as little as the price of a matchday programme a month, you'll get access to loads of Gers content, including daily updates, tactical analysis, previews and post-match shows, plus an amazing archive covering all things Rangers, including stepping back in time to discuss particular games, managerial reviews, interviews with Ibrox legends, watch-alongs, and the odd bit of stuff and nonsense too. Please head over to patreon.com/heart and hand and join thousands of bears on the best value podcast on the world's most successful club.